Hi folks, Buckley here. Welcome to workshop number 21 in MEEG104. Today we'll be talking about technical presentations. This is part one of a two-part workshop. Formative assignments. There is no formative assignment due today. You didn't have one from workshop number 20. You will have one from today, which is due Wednesday, May 6th at 2 p.m. So nothing due today, but you will have one assigned today and it'll be due on Wednesday. We're going to dust off that textbook, which we haven't used in a while. Coming up, you have required reading from today that is related to online or reports. Okay, so basically online presentations. So chapter 112, if you're in the 4th edition, 111, if you're in the 3rd, 110, if you're in the 2nd, that'll be on oral presentations. Summative assignment, congrats on getting that in. So summative assignment number 2 draft is in as of last night, and we'll be working on grading those. I did review everybody's summative number 1s who needed a regrade, so the regrading period is now closed. If you haven't contacted me yet, it's closed, okay? So we will turn around those summative number 2 drafts as quickly as possible and give you about a week to make any edits that we're recommending and then turn in your final. As always, there is live help. Love to see you guys during our optional discussion sections. Those will be with me from 3 to 3:30 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then plenty of TA office hours as well. All right, before we jump into technical presentations, I thought it's timely that we just talk about one presentation that most of you, the vast majority of people who are taking MEEG104 right now, are also taking MEEG102, so you do have a final presentation coming up. The culminating event for the design project that you guys have been working on. Obviously it's a paper design because we're on online classes. The culminating event is a presentation. You also have to turn in your full design report, but the presentation is going to be next Thursday. So not this Thursday, but the Thursday after, Thursday, May 14th, during regular class time, which is 9:30 to 10:45 a.m. We will have multiple Zoom sessions running, and in each of those Zoom sessions, there will be a team that's going to give a PowerPoint slide presentation. There will be judges who are sitting there, evaluators, as well as we're going to invite your fellow classmates. So you guys will also be assigned to review other presentations as part of what you need to do on Thursday, May 14th. So you'll be giving a presentation with your team, and then you'll be reviewing others' work and being in the audience during other people's sessions. Okay, what you're going to do is a 10-minute presentation with 3 minutes of question and answer and 2-minute changeover. So changeover is just allowing us to allow another group to pull up their slides and share their screen. So 10-minute presentation is the biggie. Okay, so you need to prepare a slide presentation on PowerPoint that's 10 minutes long. We're going to talk about that today, give you some guidance over this workshop and then part 2 workshop. So you should be in really good shape for next week's presentations after these 2 workshops this week. 3-minute Q&A, those questions are predominantly going to be coming from the evaluators, and we'll talk today about how you can best prepare for your Q&A period. Okay, so the last thing here is that, again, the audience will be several evaluators, some of them being your TAs. I'm trying to invite other faculty to also join, so you don't know who's exactly is going to be in the audience, but some people will be grading, and then obviously some of your classmates will be there as well, providing their reviews. Okay, so that's coming up for most everybody in the class. There are a few people who aren't in MEEG102 concurrently, but for the majority of folks, this is a timely topic because next week you're going to have this presentation in MEEG102. All right, let's dive into it. So our learning objectives for today are as follows. First is to recognize the 3 major goals of all technical presentations. The second is to critique others' presentations according to those goals. And third learning objective is to plan content for a presentation using something called the storyboard method. Okay, so we'll practice doing that in our class participation. Okay, let's start with the self-reflection. So I want you to think of an exceptionally good technical presentation that you've witnessed recently. Describe the setting. What was the topic? What was the location? Okay, maybe it was online, maybe we were in person. Okay, what was the audience? Was it a lecture? Was it a presentation, a conference presentation, maybe that you witnessed? Okay, what was it? What made the presentation so exceptional in your thought? And then compare and contrast this presentation, which you felt was exceptionally good, with presentations that you've witnessed that were not as exceptional. So take a second and jot down your ideas, reflecting on an exceptionally good presentation that you've witnessed recently. Okay. Reflecting for myself, actually, I actually have heard presentations recently from people outside of engineering. So it's not always us engineers or scientists who are giving the best technical presentations. In fact, a lot of people in the social sciences also do a fantastic job with presentations with content that I feel is inherently more difficult to keep people excited about. And actually, one of the best talks I've ever heard was from this woman. This is a dear, dear friend, and was a colleague at University of California, San Francisco when I was there. This is Dr. Libby Smith. She's a professor in social and behavioral sciences at UCSF. And she actually studies, she's a document historian by training, so she goes digging through archives. And where she's situated, you may think that's kind of odd to have a document historian at a medical school, but Dr. Smith actually focuses on records from big industries. Her group, and there are other people who work in different industries, but her group includes people who research the pharmaceutical industry, who research the alcohol industry. She actually focuses on the tobacco industry. So in the state of California, where obviously UCSF is based, the state actually has a trove of documents from all of the major tobacco manufacturers. These are all of their internal documents about their internal workings. And as you can imagine, there's some juicy information in there. So Dr. Smith actually began her career looking at how the tobacco companies were marketing to members of the LGBTQ community back at a time when it was not particularly cool to market to the LGBTQ community, even though they were inherently a very great market, right? So very, very loyal brand following. So Philip Morris, actually, one of her more famous papers is this one here, which was digging through the archives of Philip Morris, a major tobacco company, to see how they both courted gay men to sell cigarettes to, and also pushed them aside when their more conservative market was objecting to that. So she did a lot of work digging through those documents, and this was one of her seminal publications. I heard her talk about this several times and have followed her work to date. Again, she's a dear friend. And what strikes me about Dr. Smith when she speaks, and she's talked on some very big venues as well, so she's been on some pretty big shows, is that the content that she's working with isn't super graphically interesting. If you were to read one of her papers, like this one here, this is actually published in the American Journal of Public Health. That's a really big deal. That's a very major publication. You would see probably the only graphical element that you have in here is something like this, okay? So it's a table. The rest of it is straight text, right? This is a dense history text. But Dr. Smith is really able to make this content come to life in slide presentations and in oral descriptions of her work in a way that I find quite impressive, right? A lot of times as engineers, we really rely on the graphics to drive home our point. And in other disciplines, such as the social sciences, it's really interesting to see how people can make the content entertaining and lively, even without a huge amount of graphics. So, a number of years ago, I actually asked Dr. Smith to tell me her secrets, and she did. So these are the 10 Commandments of Technical Presentations, courtesy of Libby Smith in 2012. She sent these to me, so I'll read them off for you. Okay, and then we're going to kind of dig into how these 10 commandments, which are for a broad audience, right? So this could be in the social sciences, this could be a TED Talk, this could be a technical presentation like the one you're about to make. These 10 commandments still hold true. So first is, thou shalt tell thy audience what thou art going to tell them. Second is, thou shalt tell them. Third is, thou shalt tell them what thou hast told them. Fourth is, thou shalt not speak longer than thy allotted time. Thou shalt not present a slide that requires an apology. Thou shalt make thy audience laugh at least once. Okay, she can even make people laugh at troves of documents from the tobacco companies. Thou shalt not use a pointer, animations, or other such jazz in a distracting manner. Thou shalt not stare at thy screen the entire time. Thou shalt make eye contact with thy audience and ensure thy comprehension as thou speakest. And commandment number 10, thou shalt practice thy talk in advance and in front of somebody to ensure thy obedience to all thy commandments. Okay, so the 10 commandments of technical presentations. So looking at this a little bit, we're going to deal with these 10 commandments for not only this workshop, but the next workshop. I like to divide them into two categories. The first category is something called substance, right? So it's basically the meat of your presentation. What message are you trying to convey? The others, a few others here, are more about style, right? Making sure that you're making eye contact, that you're not using a pointer, that sort of thing. So substance and style, and we're going to go back and forth between those. Today we're going to focus a lot on substance, and in part 2 we'll focus more on style. And then this last one, number 10, is all about practicing your talk before you get up there and try to deliver it. This is particularly important the denser the technical content becomes, and also the more people that are involved in giving that presentation. Okay, so practice applies to both substance and style. All right. So let's look at these in another way. I'd like to organize these around goals. So every presentation that you are giving, every technical presentation, basically has 3 goals to it. The first goal is you want your audience to comprehend the key points of your presentation. And this really goes to one major issue around this is repetition, right? So those first 3 commandments, thou shalt tell thy audience what thou art going to tell them, you tell them, and that you tell them what you've told them. Okay, that's the idea of repetition and being very, very clear and repetitive in driving across key points. And you'll notice that I do that myself in a lot of these talks, right? The second is ensuring that the audience has confidence in your expertise. And we'll talk about this today, and we'll also talk about it in part 2 lecture. But this is kind of a mix, okay? So you've got a lot of different elements here that are ensuring that the audience has confidence in you. The first is doing things like making sure that you're not speaking too fast and you're not going over time. You're not engaging in sort of nervous stylistic habits that can happen, such as using a pointer, staring at the screen, not making eye contact. Okay, so issues such as that. The third is conveying your enthusiasm for the topic. So this can be done with having interesting graphics, okay, which is something, again, that Dr. Smith is able to do, even though she doesn't do graphics-heavy presentations. But I would say as engineers, we have the advantage of making presentations that are inherently visually enthusiastic and interesting. Thou shalt make thy audience laugh at least once, okay, keeping it light and appropriate. We'll talk about that, but that can also work. And then the big thing for both goals 2 and 3, honestly, is practicing your talk in advance, okay? Making sure that you run through it so that you are more confident and you're able to convey the enthusiasm and not just the nervousness in delivering your talk. Okay, so let's work with these 3 goals. Goal number 1, organization. So making sure that an audience comprehends what you're about to say to them is all about organization and strategic repetition. So your audience is not going to walk away from a 10 or 15-minute presentation with more than 2 or 3 points that they're going to hold on to. So it's really important that you know what those points are in advance, okay, and that you convey them over and over again. All right, so we'll deal with organization for our 2 types of papers that we've been working with throughout this semester. The first is a research paper, right, or a technical brief. You typically have an introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So far, we've been dealing with presenting this in paper form. In presentation form, you're going to follow generally that same structure. So the same organizational structure as the research paper. I would expect a couple slides on the introduction, a couple on the methods, couple on the results, and a couple on the discussion in that order, okay? Generally, you're emphasizing more the methods and the results. So that's what's taking up the bulk of the slides, the bulk of the attention of the report, okay? Or I'm sorry, of the presentation. The discussion can be expanded or contracted to fit the length of the presentation. So generally, your methods and your results are kept intact. Okay, and if you have a little more time in your presentation, it's a 15-minute presentation instead of a 10-minute presentation, you go more into depth on the discussion. Sometimes a little bit on the intro too, but generally you're either expanding or contracting the discussion to meet the length of the presentation. There is inherent repetition of the study goals that is laid out. So if you are following the same organizational structure as a research paper, you are inherently going to repeat the goals of the study. So you're introducing them at the beginning, okay, and you are capping them, you're summarizing them at the end in the discussion. So that's great because you tell people in the beginning, right, here's what the goal of my study is, and at the end you tell them whether or not you met that goal, okay, and that's going to really drive home the point for your audience. For a design report, which is what you guys are going to be working on for next week, here's how you operate, right? So a design report here at University of Delaware, we have a 4-phase structure to our reports. Okay, so generally your technical presentations are following that same 4-phase structure. Okay, you typically wind up emphasizing in a final report or a final presentation, you're emphasizing phases 1 and 3. So you really need to set the stage for the audience as to the purpose of your project, and you want to highlight the design that you've created. That doesn't mean that you totally do not discuss phase 2 or phase 4, but you may move a little quicker through those topics. Phases 1 and phase 3 are the 2 big ones, okay? Phase 2 is strongly de-emphasized, or in some instances, let's say you only have maybe 5 minutes to give a presentation on your design. You might decide to eliminate phase 2 entirely from your presentation when you do that, okay? For a 10-minute presentation, you have enough time to show maybe 1 slide on phase 2, but you definitely don't want to spend a lot of time talking about each design concept and then presenting the matrix, okay? That's information that you could save if you do get a question about what were your initial concepts. Sometimes you hold on to a slide at the end that comes that you save for Q&A. We'll talk about that in Wednesday's lecture, okay? But phase 2 is typically strongly de-emphasized or eliminated sometimes if you have a very brief report. Again, there are inherent repetition of design goals in this structure, right? So in phase 1, you're talking about the purpose, the why of your project, right? Why does this design need to exist? And in phase 4, you're showing exactly how those design goals were being met, okay? So you're looping back around to make sure that you drive home key points. All right, so if that's the organization, let's now talk about goal number 2, which is making sure that the audience not only comprehends goal 1, but also trusts the information that you're providing. The key thing here is pacing and poise, okay? So you want to make sure that your presentations are delivered at a comfortable pace with a high level of poise, okay? And we'll talk about what poise means in a second. But in terms of pacing, so a rule of thumb around pacing for presentations is you're looking to cover about 1 slide per minute. So if you have a 10-minute presentation, you would have 10 slides about of heavy-duty technical content. You would also have a title slide and an acknowledgement slide, which would probably bring your total slide deck up to 12 slides, okay? But we don't count those. Those are very quick slides that you're flipping through, okay? So, but the core content is about 1 slide per minute, which obviously can range from about 30 to 90 seconds. Okay, so question. Well, think to yourself here, how many slides in your MEEG102 presentation? You have a 10-minute presentation, a 3-minute Q&A, and a 2-minute changeover period. How many slides? All right, I would expect about 12 slides in that slide deck, okay? Fewer than 12, fewer than 10, I'd be a little worried, and more than about 14, I'd be worried, okay? So I'm looking for about 12. Obviously, you have a little wiggle room there, but about 12 is what we're looking for. Title slide, acknowledgement slide, and 10 slides, 1 minute per, or 1 slide per minute of allotted time. Okay. You're shooting for what is called a relaxed yet driven pace, okay, to your presentation. So looking at the content that would be on a single slide, you want to have 3 to 4 bullet points or 1 figure. You don't want more than that. So if you notice, all the slides that I use in any of my presentations to you pretty much have a maximum of 3 to 4 bullet points or 1 big figure. Second thing is, again, 30 to 90 seconds per slide. So if you can't talk through a slide in that time, your slide is either too dense, or in some cases, if you're blasting through it in 10 seconds, perhaps you don't need that slide, okay? Third is you want to use animations to guide pacing when possible. So this is an example of using animations. We're going to get into them in part 2 of this workshop. So next next class, we'll talk about animations, how to create them, how to make sure that you're pacing out your content. So I'm pacing out these three bullet points here. All right, let's look at violations, okay, of this rule of thumb. So again, we're looking to cover a slide in 30 to 90 seconds. We're looking for no more than 3 to 4 bullet points per page or one graph. Basically, the audience should be able to look at your slide, grasp the content within no more than, I would say, 10 seconds, and then be able to pay attention to you. Because what's happening is, as soon as I flash this information up on the screen, you're distracted by this information. You may not even be listening to what I'm saying right now, right? Because this is too much content. So this is an old slide from somebody who shall remain nameless, who used to teach the CAD class. Great human, but he was known for creating very, very cluttered slides. Okay, so this would be how this professor was communicating an intro slide around engineering drawings. Okay, it's a legal document, blah, blah, blah. Notice how long those statements are, right? So it's going to take me a while to get through each of these points. Second bullet point here, right? There's a link to a website, but if this were in class and you didn't have access to this slide, this would be a really problematic way to convey the website information, okay? All right, way too much. Now let's flip to a slide that I use in MEEG102, kind of conveying the same thing around engineering graphics, right, and engineering drawings. Okay, so the layout here, right, is very clean. So I have a statement up at the top that's directing you, orthographic projection, right? I've bolded a keyword, and then I have basically one set of images. Okay, there's enough room on this that you can look at what I'm presenting and then listen to what I'm saying. Okay, so when I do need text to come up, I'm making sure I'm pacing it. So here I am highlighting the different kinds of lines. Those are coming up one at a time as I am introducing it. So this is a good example of a good amount of content on the page, an appropriate amount of content. This would be an inappropriate amount of content, okay? And also this is a great example of use of animations to control pacing. All right, now let's talk about poise. So we basically talked about the audience trusting you in how much content you are displaying. You also want to talk about how you are presenting your work, right? Poise, the way in which you carry yourself during the presentation. So most issues with poise during presentations can be corrected through practice. A lot of it has to do with nervousness, right? If you are unfamiliar with the content, what comes next on your screen, that is going to be very apparent to your audience, right? So practice makes perfect on all of these. So low poise situation would be reading off of the slides, right? So if you are finding yourself looking at the slide deck, looking at the slide in front of you and reading off of that, this is more apparent when you are presenting in person and you're turning back away from the audience and looking at what's coming up on your slides. Okay, there's no value in that, right? People in the audience can read your slides just fine. They want to hear what you have to say in addition to that. Okay, so it's okay to glance back at your slides as occasional prompts. Okay, we all get lost in the middle of a discussion sometimes, so it's okay to glance back and look at that or to check that you're on the right animation. Okay, but reading off the slides is a big no-no. Little to no eye contact with the audience, also a problem, right? So people, we are socialized to trust people when we make eye contact with them. So if you are presenting information but you're looking down at your shoes or staring up at the screen, your audience will inherently trust you less, okay? So you want to make sure that you're making contact with the audience during the majority of the presentation. You don't have to awkwardly look at one person, you can scan the room, okay? But you want to make sure that you're looking out at the audience. Third thing is lots of verbal filler, and I do this too. Okay, this is one of the reasons that it really annoys me to go back and listen to my presentations, because I can hear every bit of verbal filler, all right? So through practice, when you practice a presentation, you actually start to lose the verbal filler, the ums, the ers, and the wells. Advanced presentation techniques, it is sometimes you will lose your place, and more experienced presenters can actually pause and get back to where they want it to be, right? So instead of putting an there, you would just pause and pick it back up. Now, again, that comes with practice. Fourth thing, excessive use of a laser pointer or a cursor. A lot of times this is distracting to the audience, particularly laser pointers, where it's dancing all over the screen. Maybe you're nervous and or had too much coffee and it's vibrating all over the place. Okay, there's nothing more annoying when you're in the audience and you're seeing that. It also really conveys nervousness like nothing else. You should try to use animations. So using animations instead of the cursor can be a way to to up your poise, right? Last is incoherent or very delayed or inappropriate response to question and answer. Okay, question and answer periods, we include those with all presentations that we have in our program, because when you are presenting out in the real world, people will typically ask you questions. Sometimes they'll interrupt you in the middle of the presentation, other times it'll be held for the end. There will be a Q&A period at the end of your MEEG 102 presentations. You should be able to anticipate what a reviewer or an audience member would ask you. You will always get some oddball questions, but for the most part, you may say, okay, well, I didn't include phase 2, right? I didn't talk about my concepts. So maybe an audience member would be interested in what my concepts were. I'm going to make sure that I can articulate that very clearly during Q&A. So you kind of rehearse with your team what questions might come up. All right. So this all comes back, folks, to rehearsal. And I'd like to tell a brief little story here. I know I talked about this guy because there's another Papadopoulos in this class, so that's a shout out to you, John. This is why I sometimes called you Panos in class. Sorry about that. But even the best amongst us rehearse, and I don't claim to be the best myself. There are some far more eloquent lecturers than I. I feel I do a good job with my slides, but there are some people who can really give a beautiful lecture. This is one of them. So I had the great fortune of being in Dr. Papadopoulos's solid mechanics class when I was a graduate student at Berkeley. I actually had him for my first semester and then a couple other classes. And he is by far one of the most elegant lecturers I have ever encountered. Probably him and Dr. Prasad, who's our chairman, both are among the best lectures I've ever had. But Dr. Papadopoulos, I was told an interesting story when I was a graduate student by some of the senior graduate students. So I'm in Dr. Papadopoulos's class and I come back to the lab and I sit down and I say, boy, you know, that man, there's no verbal filler. He basically dances across the room writing these equations. He can answer any question on the fly. It's beautiful, right? And one of the senior graduate students said to me, well, you know, he practices. He's been teaching this class. Panos was teaching that class for probably about 10 years by the time I took it from him, and he'd won many, many teaching awards. So he knew what he was doing. There's a guy that if anybody could walk in and wing it every day, it was Panos, but he didn't. He would sit in his office and he would actually rehearse his presentations because he wanted to deliver them that clearly. And as a student, it really showed. So I'll tell you, I don't always have the time to rehearse, but I do go through my slides. I do think about them deeply. And I think about Professor Papadopoulos when I do that. So even the best amongst us folks rehearse to give a talk. And I did give a TED Talk once in my life. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. But for that TED Talk, I definitely had to rehearse because there was no script, there was no prompter, and it was 10 minutes. So there have been various times in my life where I've rehearsed more or less for my presentation. So don't be afraid to do it. All the best do it, and it really shows, okay? All right. So we've talked about comprehension, making sure, goal number 1, making sure that the audience understands the key points of your talk. Goal number 2, making sure the audience trusts you. Goal number 3 is enthusiasm. Okay, so you should feel some level of passion about whatever you're presenting. If you don't, you should fake it, okay? So if you are not enthusiastic about what you're presenting, the audience won't be either. So you need to inject a little bit of enthusiasm into your presentation. And here's a little pep talk. I'm going to give you a couple reasons for why I think everyone will have at least one of these on their list, why you should be enthusiastic when you're giving a presentation. The first is, most times this is the culmination of a lot of work on your part, right? So I'm excited to give these lectures to you, even if the topic doesn't, make me exceptionally excited. I'm excited to give these lectures to you because I put in some work in pulling them together, right? I was very excited when I gave my dissertation, right? Or when I give a conference paper, or when I'm talking about a topic like, I get excited about graphs, okay? But all of those instances are also a great culmination of work. So remember that your design project presentation is a celebration. It's a culmination of a lot of work that you and your team have done this semester. Second is, you're the expert. Since you put in all this work, and this is your creation, you're actually the expert on this content. So you're getting a chance now to teach somebody else about a topic that you know a lot about, right? So you can be enthusiastic about that point. Third is, the audience is inherently choosing to watch what you present. I know that's not always the case with lectures, but I assume it to be, okay? But when you're talking at a conference, when you're talking at senior design, people have chosen to be in the room and watch you, okay? So that should make you a little excited. Fourth is, you've rehearsed multiple times and you can do this presentation in your sleep. So that calms down the nerves, right? And you can focus on just enjoying the experience. And fifth is, the world is your stage. So if you're an extrovert and you inherently like to talk or present, I think you can tell by now that that's me, this is an opportunity for me to share everything with the world, right? So if you're an extrovert, the world is your stage. If you're an introvert, you can get off the stage after this presentation. So I know that sometimes presentations can be kind of painful for people. It's okay presenting if presenting isn't your favorite thing ever. You can still be very good at it. And I'm going to give two examples from our own community in this regard. So one of my mentors in the department, who is a great guy, he doesn't teach too many undergraduate classes anymore. His name is Professor Mike Santerre. If you see him in the hallways, tell him hi, introduce yourself. He loves students. Mike has been a longtime mentor for me since I was an undergraduate. I love him dearly. He is an exceptional teacher. He taught me solid mechanics. He teaches upper division and graduate courses now in mechanics of solids and biomechanics. He's a natural extrovert, right? So this guy is another one that just dances around up there and really conveys a lot of enthusiasm for a topic that's not always super exciting, right? And he's famous for the line, "Can you dig it?" So instead of asking, does anybody have any questions, it's, can you dig it? So Mike obviously loves lecturing. Lecturing at the end of a lecture, when you see Mike, when I see him in the hallway, Professor Santerre, he's psyched, right? He's just taught a class. And that's wonderful, okay? So I think I have a little bit of my mentor in me, in that I feel the same way, right? Lecturing gives him energy. Dr. Enzer, my dear friend, okay, is also an exceptional teacher. You know him from courses like Intro to Engineering. He also teaches the core undergraduate classes in chemical engineering. He's a natural introvert. So Dr. Enzer, is a quiet kind of guy, okay? When I see him after a lecture, he feels drained, right? But you wouldn't know from his lectures that he's that introverted. He's animated up there. He's asking people questions, right? So it's not necessarily his favorite thing to do, but he's very, very good at it. So take inspiration from one of these two kind of polar opposites, extrovert, introvert. Everybody falls kind of within that spectrum, and it's okay if presenting isn't your favorite thing, but we do want you to be comfortable at it. We want you to be able to get through it, okay, and walk away feeling good about yourself. All right. So we talked about kind of poise, how you hold yourself. The other thing that can convey enthusiasm is actually the format, right? So formatting also enhances or detracts from audience enthusiasm. So I think that's obvious from the examples that I presented a little bit earlier. You would be less enthusiastic no matter how inspiring the speaker. Okay, you would be less enthusiastic with a slide sitting in front of you as an audience member that looks something like this than you would with something like this, right? This is much easier to digest. Okay, I'm able to look at it and I don't feel beaten over the head. We call that PowerPoint fatigue. Okay, so even if I fix the issue, let's say, these are just some example slides. Imagine that I had 4 slides with different content, but 4 slides in a row that just had bullet point after bullet point after bullet point, right? You're going to feel pretty fatigued. Even if I have an appropriate number of bullet points, it's going to feel pretty dry, right? So a technical presentation that just includes text after text after text, it comes at you the same way, the audience is going to feel fatigued and obviously less enthusiastic. This is where really mixing up your slide deck. So instantly, right? Again, not focusing on the content here, but just looking at the formatting, okay? Breaking this up with some imagery, okay? Allowing the slides to breathe. That's going to help a lot with fatigue and losing the audience's enthusiasm. All right. Last point I want to make about audience enthusiasm is humor. Okay, obviously I sprinkle a lot of humor throughout my talks. During technical presentations, I do tone it down a bit. Okay, so I might have one bit of light humor, but I'm making sure that not every graph, is a crack up. Okay, so a bit of light humor is great, but don't overdo it. You also want to make sure that any humor that you decide to incorporate, okay, is appropriate. So, for example, right, there was this joke, I don't know if you found it funny, but here I am, suggesting that you should think of me when you think of an exceptionally good technical presentation. So self-referential or self-deprecating humor is always a good bet, okay, keeping it light. You want to make sure that you don't offend anybody else, right? Okay, so I know that I'm a safe bet to kind of poke fun at, right, or make a self-reference. Other people, it may stray. So make sure that whatever joke you are making, if you choose to incorporate a bit of light humor, that you don't do too much of it and that you're making sure that it's appropriate. Okay, this brings us, folks, to our class participation activity. So you now are going to critique the technical presentation corresponding to your reviewer color. So what you have in front of you on Canvas is you have the presentations, the final presentations that go along with your case study design reports that you have been reading all semester. So I pulled down their presentations in PowerPoint format so you can actually see all the graphics and all of the animations. You are to flip through that. Okay, these were 15-minute presentations with 3 minutes of question and answer and 2-minute changeover. So that was the allotted time, 15-minute presentation. You're to critique for comprehension. Does the audience understand the key points? Looking at overall organization and repetition. For confidence, would the audience feel confident in the presenter? You're looking at pacing and slide information density. And then enthusiasm. Was the formatting thoughtful? Were there any other elements, maybe like some light humor, that conveyed enthusiasm for the topic? Okay? All right, so take 15 minutes and complete your class participation activity, please. All right, I'm going to critique the tree hugger presentation, which is the in-class presentation that I've been using to critique, and call out a couple things. So let's look first at goal number 1, which is making sure the audience comprehends the key points of this presentation. So for the tree hugger project, this team has 19 slides for a 15-minute presentation. That may be 1 or 2 slides over, okay? It may be okay depending on how quickly they're moving through certain slides, or they may be at risk of pushing over that 15 minutes, okay? So I would be more comfortable with closer to 17 or 18. All right, but phase 1 is 7 slides long, okay? Phase 2 is 2 slides. Phase 3 is 6 slides, and then phase 4 is 4 slides. So if I had to cut somewhere, right, this actually looks pretty good, this balance, less on phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 are about the same. 7 slides for phase 1, I may want to cut that down. If I had to cut 1 or 2 slides, I would cut from phase 1, right? Okay, so that's looking at the overall organization. Now let's look at the issue of the main point. So the main point in this report was really that this concept that the team was coming up with should increase the stability of the existing tree hugger design. So this product already exists. It's a design improvement that they're working on. It needs to be more stable when it's being used in the field. So where am I seeing this information? Well, in all of these places. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slides mention that. So that point is coming across again and again and again, starting from phase 1 all the way to phase 4. Okay, so they're really making good use of repetition here in this presentation. Goal number 2, confidence. Okay, so this team did an excellent job in thinking about how much PowerPoint, okay, how much text they're going to use in PowerPoint and how much they're going to rely on rehearsal and them actually talking over the slides. So this is the appropriate length text here. So this little sketch, 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points and an image. This is great. So what they're going to do is you can very quickly look at this, right? and this is a sketch of this test, and then look at the imagery associated with that validation test. That's really great. For the final concept, this slide might be a little bit dense, okay, and probably could have made use of some animations here to really convey the intricacies with these design changes. So this would have been better maybe with a little less content, or if you want to leave this amount of content, to also have animations so that the audience isn't distracted to view all of this at once when the slide first comes up. Enthusiasm. It's hard to gauge enthusiasm with this team without hearing them present, okay, but I do know that they were very enthusiastic. I can tell that the slides they're visually interesting and they're mixed, right? So I've got tables, I've got flowcharts, okay, I've got interesting graphics, bar charts. This is all mixed together nicely so that you're not fatiguing the audience with multiple examples of the same type of slide, okay, so pretty good on enthusiasm as well. All right, so hopefully your review for class participation was similar. You found some similar points. We're going to talk about one last item now, and this leads into your formative assignment, which is storyboarding. So storyboarding is an excellent tool for planning out presentations. All that storyboarding is, folks, is sketching out either by hand or just taking some brief notes, sketching out over a set of blank slides how you're going to lay out the content. And you can also do this, I've seen some people do this on a whiteboard with Post-its. That also works really well. I'm going to put this here or not, okay, but we'll do storyboarding via some blank slides. Okay, so here is a blank slide deck, PowerPoint slide deck. First thing that's going to go in there, slide 1 is always the title slide, and then we're going to need to end this presentation somewhere. Let's say this is your 10-minute presentation. So in this deck, I've given you 14 slides. That's probably 1 or 2 more slides than you would need, but you may have some short slides in there, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a buffer. Okay, what would come after the title slide if we were doing our design presentation for MEEG102? Well, something that might work there is the background and motivation, okay? Motivating your toy concept, right? That would likely be the next slide. Then there might be some benchmarking if you've had some interesting benchmarks that you want to pull in, a table there or maybe an image. Then we're moving into the rest of phase 1, project scope, metrics table, concepts. I'm going to keep that to one slide there. And then phases 3 and 4, okay? So here would be my way to lay out a typical 10-minute presentation. We're ending on slide 13 with acknowledgments, okay? Yours may be a little different. Everybody's is going to vary, okay? When you storyboard, you don't need to have everything finalized on here. The idea is to sketch it. So it's basically a really rough draft. Think of it as writing a bullet point summary instead of a paragraph for an outline, right? So here would be an example of a storyboarded slide for design validation. So I'm going to showcase a test. I'm going to have high-level details of the setup. I'm 2 to 3 bullets there. And then I'm going to have an illustration of the components with the key components labeled. That's basically what we're doing here, right? So this would be what I would see on your storyboard. This is what I'd see in the final layout of your slides. Okay, that brings us to formative assignment number 21, which involves you storyboarding your MEEG102 toy design project with your MEEG102 team. So I suggest that you work with your team on this. You can submit the same storyboard. I'm okay with that. Your submissions can be identical, but I do need you as an individual to submit your storyboard, okay? You may consult with your teammates. What you want to do, again, is give me this, okay? I don't need to see this. I don't need a draft of your presentation. I want to see how it's storyboarded on the blank storyboard pages. If you're not in MEEG102, there's example design report provided for you to storyboard, okay? All right, so this brings us to the end of part 1 of our 2-part workshop series on presentations. Your formative assignment, again, is due on Wednesday at 2. You're going to work with your design team in MEEG102 to storyboard your presentation. Required reading is the chapter on presentations in your textbook, which is chapter 112 if you're in the 4th edition, and the other chapters there if you're in the 3rd or 2nd. Summative number 2 is being graded, and I hope to see some of you during our optional discussion section. Thank you, guys.